Our next speaker is Leszek Kołodziejczyk from University of Warsaw, and we'll hear about quantifier elimination.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me. This is, I believe, the first opportunity in my life to give a conference talk in the city where I was born and spent most of my pre-university life in. So it's very nice. Also, this is my first visit to Gdansk in over 2 months. This is the Gdansk Logic Conference, so there should be a non-set theory talk. This is the non-set theory talk, or the least set theory talk, depending on your definitions and metrics. So I'm going to spend a lot of time explaining the background, and providing some context. This is going to be about joint work with Marta Fiori-Carones, who was a postdoc in Warsaw, Tin-Loc Wong, who once was a postdoc in Warsaw himself, but he's been in Singapore for a while, and Keita Yokoyama, who's in Sendai in Japan. And it will be about weak fragments of second-order arithmetic. So my first aim is to explain what this is about, and I'll try to go slowly, and I guess I'll spend at least half of my talk explaining the background. So second-order arithmetic and its fragments, those are axiomatic theories formulated in a two-sorted first-order language. There's one sort of variables for natural numbers. We use lowercase letters for them. And there is a second kind of variables. Those are the second-order variables. We use capitals for those. And those are intended to stand for sets of natural numbers. And the idea, of course, is that once you have natural numbers, you can use them to code other finite objects like rationals or finite sequences and so on. And the second order objects, the sets of numbers, you can use them to code reals, continuous functions. If your theory is strong enough, you can code the Borel and analytic sets and so on and so on. The non-logical symbols are pretty obvious. We have the usual arithmetical operations on the numbers. I want to have 2 to the x in the language just to not bother explaining when it's needed and when it's not. And there's just one symbol relating the first and second order objects. A number can belong to a set. That's it. This language supports the pretty standard quantifier alternation hierarchies, I guess. If you have a formula with no second order quantifiers, that's called arithmetical. And if you count the quantifier blocks and ignore first order bounded quantifiers, and it's n quantifier blocks starting with existential, that's sigma 0n. The dual class is pi 0n. And if you're counting only blocks of second order quantifiers and you're starting with existential and you're ignoring the arithmetical, the first order quantifiers, that's the sigma 1 and pi 1 and hierarchy. I'm assuming that this is familiar to pretty much everybody here. The sort of most natural approximation to the full theory of omega, p of omega, that you can formulate in this language is full second order arithmetic. The axioms of that are, well, there are some axioms telling you that addition is commutative and associative, and 0 is the smallest element, and there's nothing between 0 and 1, and so on. Specifically, it's just a finite list of axioms for the non-negative part of what's called the discretely ordered ring. Then sets exist. So whatever formula you can write down, there should be a lowercase k here. Sorry, that's a typo. Whatever formula you can write down, possibly with parameters, it should not contain this capital variable x. There is a set consisting of those numbers which satisfy that formula. So every property of numbers corresponds to a formula, and then every set is inductive. So whatever set you have, if it contains 0 and is closed under successor, it's the whole thing. It's the whole set of natural numbers. And this theory, from my perspective, it's insanely strong. I know it's not from the perspective of some of you, but it's just insane. I mean, it's obviously false, I'm sure. Generally, pretty strong fragments of second order arithmetic have a sort of set theoretic feel to them. They're if you're high up enough in the hierarchy of fragments of second order arithmetic, there is a canonical way to interpret the language of set theory in the language of arithmetic. You code the, say, membership relation by means of trees. This is, I guess, pretty familiar to some of you as well. And under that interpretation, strong enough fragments of second-order arithmetic are actually bi-interpretable with fragments of countable set theory. So you have to formulate it the right way, but it's roughly you take away power set and add the axiom that every set is countable. So those are not the fragments we're going to be looking at here. Weaker fragments, they have a more computability theoretic feel. I wanted to discuss two of them for now. There will be a few more later on. So arithmetical comprehension, ACE0, is this theory that you get by allowing yourself to form only sets corresponding to arithmetical properties. So if you want to form a set of numbers having some property, you're not allowed to express that property using second-order quantification. So if you've got, say, a tree in the Baire space, then you can take the set of vertices such that below that vertex there are infinitely many points, because that's arithmetical quantification. You know, yeah, for every number there's more than that number of points, for example, or for every level there is a point below that level, below the vertex v. That's fine, but you might not have the set of those vertices such that the tree is well founded below that vertex, because that's pi11 complete. So in general, you won't have access to that as a set. You won't be able to manipulate it. It won't be a legitimate second-order object for you. And even weaker theory, RCA0. So ACA stands for arithmetical comprehension axiom. RCA stands for recursive comprehension axiom, where recursive means computable. So RCA0 allows only comprehension for delta 1 properties. So if you can define a property using both a sigma 01 and a pi 01 formula, that's okay, that counts as a set. So basically delta 01 means computable. So if a property of natural numbers is computable, that gives you a set. If you use just the induction axiom, every set is inductive, that would only give you induction for computable properties. You want a bit more, and we'll come back to this later on. You want a bit more, so you're allowing yourself induction for all sigma 1 properties. We'll see what happens when you disallow that in a while. So, as mentioned, these sorts of fragments have a more computability theoretic feel to them, although I won't really dwell much on the computability theory if you're not really comfortable with that sort of well, with that background, that's fine. We won't use it much. So you can basically axiomatize RCA0 by saying if you're given some sets and there is a property that's computable, when you're also allowed to ask questions, does that number belong to one of those predefined sets? Then that property, that computable property, is a set as well. ACA0 is basically RCA0 plus every set has its Turing jump, if you know what that is. The halting problem relative to every set is a set itself. But again, if you're not really used to that framework, that's fine. We won't use it much. So one major, possibly the major place where these theories appear is this field of logic, or this research program called reverse mathematics, where people want to understand the logical strength of theorems from mostly relatively ordinary mathematics. So from, for example, stuff that you could encounter in undergraduate course in analysis or algebra or elsewhere. And a way of measuring how strong, I don't know, the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem is, for instance, is to prove that it's equivalent to a certain set existence axiom formulated in this language of second-order arithmetic. And to prove equivalences, you need some base theory to get you off the ground. The usual base theory for that is recursive comprehension, so computable mathematics. So RC0 is the theory that you use to prove theorems equivalent to set existence axioms, or you use to prove equivalent implications between theorems and set existence axioms. And that's what reverse mathematics is about. Very often, the theorems that you study, the mathematical theorems that you consider, are pi12 for every real there exists a real, or for every set of numbers there exists a set of numbers. And how strong they are in these terms is closely connected to if the statement is for all x exists y, how uncomputable y is given an argument x. How hard it is to compute y if you're given your instance of the pi12 principle x. So for example, let's discuss some examples using these two theories that I've mentioned. Over the base theory recursive or computable comprehension RC0, AC0 is equivalent to lots and lots of things. Here are a few. For example, the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. Every bounded sequence of reals, or every sequence of reals from the closed unit interval, has a convergent subsequence. Every countable ring, you can't really talk about other structures beyond countable in this language, or at least not comfortably, without some sort of coding apparatus. Every countable ring has a maximal ideal. That's also arithmetical comprehension. And Ramsey's theorem, but for triples. And for that matter, for quadruples, quintuples, and beyond as well. So Ramsey's theorem for triples, and just two colors, every coloring of triples of natural numbers has by two colors has a homogeneous set, an infinite homogeneous set. That's arithmetical comprehension. And intuitively speaking, the reason why, for example, Ramsey for triples gives you arithmetical comprehension is that there is a computable coloring of triples. You can tell, given a triple, what the color is, such that if you take any homogeneous set, that will let you compute the halting problem. So the Turing jump of zero, say of a computable set. So that's how you get. That's typically how you prove these relatively easy equivalences or implications from a theorem to AC0. So here's like the main character in this story today. This is an axiom in between RC0 and AC0, known as weak König's lemma. So König's lemma says that every infinite finitely branching tree has an infinite path. Weak König's lemma restricts that to sort of trees that are syntactically binary, where you have a very tight control of over the finite branching. So every tree in the Cantor space has an infinite path. That's what every tree that consists of finite 0, 1 strings. That's how you guarantee its finite branching. Has to have an infinite path. That's what weak König's lemma says. It's stronger than RC0. In general, there are computable binary trees with no computable paths, because, for example, there's a computable binary tree where any path would correspond to a consist extension of piano arithmetic or something like that, something that's known to be uncomputable. It's easy to prove with using arithmetical comprehension. You just find the leftmost path in the in an infinite binary tree, and it's equivalent to lots of things. I mean, almost by definition, weak König's lemma says that the Cantor space is compact in the sense of coverings. Every open cover of the Cantor set has a finite subcover. This is also equivalent to rings having prime ideals. It's pretty easily shown to be equivalent to the completeness theorem, or at least the part of the completeness theorem that can be expressed in this language. So sorry, for countable first order languages, and to more mathematically advanced stuff. You know, Brouwer's fixed point theorem, Peano's existence theorem for ordinary differential equations. It's the thing that you need to prove lots and lots of theorems in basic mathematics that are not quite completely constructed, that have some incomputable element in them. So this is a very, very ubiquitous axiom in, say, basic mathematics once you start looking for it. And even though it goes beyond computability, it is in a sense much stronger. It lets you do much more mathematics than RC0. it is in some sense weak. So a fundamental fact about this guy, about König's lemma, is that if you add it to RC0, then it doesn't prove any new statements about natural numbers. Moreover, it doesn't prove any new pi11 statements. So nothing of the form for every real something about that real and naturals is going to be provable using König's lemma that wasn't provable computably already. And the usual proof of this was first proved by Harrington. Not really sure about the 77, but late 70s. This was published much later, so that people managed to come up with independent proofs later on. I'm aware of one proof by Zygmunt Ratajczyk, for example, that you can find in the Abstracts for Logic Colloquium 84, I believe, or somewhere around that time. And I think that it might have not been the only independent proof. I think Harrington's proof was only published in the 90s in Steve Simpson's book about second-order arithmetic. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, this was rediscovered after its original discovery, more at least once. And the way you prove this, so how do you prove that König's lemma doesn't give you any new pi11 theorems that weren't provable in RC0? Well, you take a countable model of RC0, where countable means not only the first order universe, not only what the model thinks are numbers is countable, but also the family of, well, what the model thinks is P of omega, so the family of sets that it believes to be the second order, the set universe. That has to be countable seen from the outside as well. And you can extend that without changing the number theoretic universe so as to satisfy König's lemma. So you have to add these paths through binary trees. This is the original argument. You can do it in a number of ways, but the original argument is a forcing argument where you add paths one by one. And if you're just adding a path to a single infinite binary tree, you use forcing where the conditions are infinite subtrees of that tree. Infinite subtrees that the ground model sees. And then the generic is a path that possibly the model didn't see. And this is all pretty straightforward, except there is some challenge in guaranteeing that you can preserve the right amount of induction. So the preserving mathematical induction is actually once you add this path, is actually the main technical issue there. And I would want to emphasize that there is nothing particularly unique or canonical about that construction. So firstly, there are lots of ways to extend the model of RC0, preserving the numbers to satisfy König's lemma. You can get lots of non-elementarily equivalent models of König's lemma, starting from RC0, from model of RC0. And secondly, König's lemma is not at all the unique or a unique or a maximal pi12 principle that's pi11 conservative over RC0. So for example, here's another principle that's also pi11 conservative. This is called COH or CO for cohesive. It says that if you've got an infinite family of subsets of omega, then there is going to be some particular infinite set which is either almost contained for each of these sets Rn. This infinite set is either almost contained in Rn or almost contained in the complement of Rn. So it's a kind of, you can think of it as a sort of ultra filter on the family of Rns. It tells you which of the Rns are big and which are small. So that's another principle that's incomparable with König's lemma. And it also it goes beyond our computability as well, but it doesn't provide any new information about numbers. It's pi11 conservative. And in fact, there is a result by Henry Tausner that if you consider the set of pi12 sentences such that adding them to RC0 doesn't provide any new pi11 consequences, the sentences are pi1 conservative or RC0, that's all these things are mutually consistent with one another. So you can take them all and that's a consistent theory. And in computability theoretic terms, this set of sentences is pi2 complete. So it's not recursively enumerable. So in particular, you cannot computably axiomatize it. And in particular, there's no strongest pi1-2 principle that's pi1-1 conservative. So there's just a great variety of these things, and there's lots of stuff that you can add that adds something new but tells you nothing new about numbers. And now we'll go down still a little bit lower in the hierarchy of fragments of second-order arithmetic. As a reminder, the base theory, the typical base theory used, has comprehension only for delta 1 properties, but it has more induction that would come from that comprehension. It has induction for sigma 1. So computable properties are sets, but computably enumerable properties, more than that, are inductive. You can reason about them by induction, okay? So there's a theory introduced by Simpson and Smith in the 1980s. Well, the name is pretty lame, but I guess it's stuck in the collective consciousness of the field, so I have to use it. RC0 star, and that's obtained simply by disallowing the sigma 1 induction. You just say, you know, computable properties correspond to sets, and the sets are inductive. So if you know that a property is a set, then you can use induction about that property, nothing else. So you will see why that's inconvenient for to say technical applications, why that is inconvenient in actually doing mathematics when you disallow the sigma 1 induction, but it's useful for various reasons. Maybe it's more philosophically coherent in some sense, you know, that much comprehension, so you should have that much induction. You don't have induction for properties that are in sets. It can be used to track where the uses of sigma 1 induction are necessary. It's also somewhat more modest in the proof theoretic sense. It has a smaller class of provably total functions. So if you want to, for example, conclude that the provability of a statement of the form, for every number there exists a number, you get some sort of algorithmic procedure, you get better bounds on that using this weaker theory. So there are a number of reasons to consider this, but it's considerably less popular than the one without the star. And you can formulate a theory called WKL0 star that sticks weak König's lemma on top of RC0 star. And already in the paper introducing this, the 86 paper, Simpson and Smith showed that this is pi1-1 conservative again. So if you add weak König's lemma to RC0 star to this weaker base theory, you again get no new truths about numbers. And the proof is again more or less the same argument that Harrington did. Again, you force with subtrees of a particular tree in order to add a path through that tree. And again, the main difficulty is ensuring that you have enough induction in the model you produced. Well, this leads to a number of questions. One is not quite in the paper of Tausner that I mentioned, but he asks a very similar question, and it turns out to be related to the one I'm stating here. So, is it the case as it was in over RC0? Is it again the case that there are lots and lots of pi1-2 sentences that are pi1-1 conservative over this base theory? Is that theory consisting of those sentences again pi2 complete, or can it perhaps be computably axiomatized? Is it somehow different from? Is the situation here somehow different from the situation where you had sigma 1 induction? It is clear that there are other sentences other than weak König's lemma that are pi1-1 conservative over RC0 star, but one wonders whether the variety of them is so great as over RC0. So this leads me to the main result of our work, which was a major surprise for us, I have to say. We discovered this in the context of doing some, well, investigating the reverse mathematical strength of some Ramsey theoretic statements, and we just stumbled upon this and realized that this happens eventually. I told you that if you have a model of RC0 and you want to extend it so as to add paths through trees, you can do it in lots of inequivalent ways. In particular, you can always get two different models of Königs lemma that will disagree on some second order sentence. So it turns out that if you're doing the same thing in a model of RC0 star that isn't a model of RC0, then that's no longer the case. If you start with a countable model of RC0 star, so that sigma 1 induction fails relative to some set, so not RC0 is satisfied. Maybe I'll write out what that means in a moment. Then, and you take any two extensions of that model with the same first order universe, satisfying with Königs lemma, then they're actually isomorphic. So they're the same model. So there's a canonical unique way to extend your structure to satisfy with Königs lemma. So maybe I'll write out what not RC0 means. I think it's important to clarify the quantifier complexity of that statement. So not RC0 says there exists a set such that induction fails for some sigma 01 formula with X as the only second order parameter, as the only second order parameter. So this is a sigma 1 statement. It's not an arithmetical statement. It's not purely about numbers. It is a full statement asserting the existence of a certain strange set. And once you're working in a model of RC0 star that has such a set, then there is only one way to extend it to a model with Königs lemma. Any two extensions will be isomorphic. In fact, you may also require the isomorphism to fix your favorite tuple of sets and numbers pointwise. And this has a number of corollaries. I mean, this is a pretty rare thing in, say, the realm of theory subject to Gödel's theorem. It implies, we'll come to why, it implies that in models that have such a set relative to which sigma 1 induction fails, weak Königs lemma actually implies the collapse of the second order quantifier hierarchy. So if you think of the second order quantifier hierarchy as the analytic hierarchy, which in general makes sense, weak Königs lemma in this context, if you don't have a lot of induction, it implies the collapse of the analytic hierarchy to delta 1, even a bit lower, in fact. And also, if you stick in this negation of induction to your axioms, then weak Königs lemma is the strongest pi12 statement that doesn't provide any new information about numbers, doesn't give you any new pi11 consequences. So it's completely different than in the setting if you have sigma 1 induction. There you have lots of statements and that were pi11 conservative, and there was no strongest one. Here there is a strongest one. I do perhaps want to mention that the pi11 consequences of this theory, even though it's a false theory, the pi11 consequences are actually true. They're a subset, they're a proper subset of the pi11 consequences of AC0. So for example, if you take just the purely arithmetical consequences of this theory, that's a proper fragment of piano arithmetic. Oh, I've still got a while. I've used up, I guess, about half of my time, which was the plan, in fact. I'm not running late. My plan for the rest of the talk, now we get to the talk proper, is to do most of the following three things. First, I want to say a little bit on how you prove this theorem. Then explain how these already mentioned corollaries follow, how you get the quantifier elimination, how you get the maximality of weak Königs lemma as a pi11 conservative principle. And then I mentioned that this appeared in the context of some of our work on the strength of Ramsey theoretic principles. I want to say how this is related to why this provides new insights into Ramsey's theorem. Not really about Ramsey's theorem specifically, but to a certain class of problems related to that. So let's first try to say a little bit about the proof without getting into details, of course. So again, the theorem says that if you've got a model of computable comprehension, so a computable property of numbers corresponds to a set, and in the set theoretic universe, in the second order structure, you have a set such that sigma 1 induction fails relative to that set, and it's countable, and you extend it in two different ways to two set theoretic universes satisfying with König's lemma, say script y and script w, then script y and script w will be isomorphic. So there'll be an isomorphism between this two-sorted structure and that two-sorted structure. So a basic question, I guess, is why might failure of induction matter here? Why might it let you use some new tools that aren't provided when you have more induction? So intuitively, the main reason is the following. What does it mean for sigma 1 induction to fail? This also tells you why it's nice to assume sigma 1 induction when you're doing mathematics. So failure of sigma 1 induction means the following thing. There's going to be a set of numbers. So here's the model M, which thinks of itself as omega, of course. I am the natural numbers. And there's going to be a set of numbers that's recognized as a legitimate set, a legitimate second order object, which is cofinal in the natural numbers. So in some sense, it's infinite. But for some large enough number, say k, it doesn't have k elements. It doesn't have a k element finite subset. So there is a cofinal subset of the natural numbers, which has, you could say, cardinality j, where j is what is called a proper cut in the natural numbers. So, there will be a first element, a second element, a third element, an ith element possibly for some non-standard number I, but there won't be a kth element if k is big enough. So there is this very sparse cofinal set in the natural numbers. In some sense, omega in this model behaves like a singular cardinal. There's a cofinal sequence in omega of cardinality less than omega. And that's what gives you a lot of control over things. So this blue set A, the sparse cofinal set, is on the one hand big in the sense of being infinite. You can reach arbitrarily high up in the model using elements of A. On the other hand, it's small. It has just j many elements for some proper fragment of omega j. So you can code information about the set using a number above the cut j. So it's big in some senses and small in others, and that gives you some flexibility for various technical constructions. The actual proof of the isomorphism theorem, that's a back and forth argument of a kind that appears in various places. How do you prove that countable structures satisfying some general properties are isomorphic? Typically, you do back and forth. And you just have to come up with the right inductive invariant and make sure that the invariant is preserved as you add elements to the domain and the range of the isomorphism. So yeah, this is a back and forth construction. At each step, we have some tuples of numbers, say small r, and sets capital R in one of the two universes. So maybe this is X, this is Y, that's a bigger second order universe, this is W, that's a bigger second order universe. There are some numbers R, there are some other numbers S, there are some sets capital R in Y, there are some sets capital S in W, and your finite partial isomorphism takes these numbers to those numbers and these sets to those sets. And the inductive invariant is roughly, and this is not quite, and this is not quite precise, and it can't be precise as stated, that for every bounded formula, so just a delta zero formula with no second order quantification and no unbounded first order quantification, for every element of this strange cofinal set A, for any element of this cut that somehow represents the cardinality of the set, it's satisfied by the tuple of R's in the first model, if and only if it's satisfied by the tuple of S's in the second model. And to make it really work, you have to express this using a truth definition for delta zero formulas and require this to hold not just for the actual standard formulas, but for some small non-standard formulas, and you decrease the amount of formulas for which this holds along the way. So the actual statement is pretty technical, and I'm not going to go there. And of course, as always, or as usually in a back and forth argument, the core issue is how to make this go through in the inductive step. How do you add new elements to the domain and range of the finite partial isomorphism so as to preserve the inductive invariant? And here is where weak König's lemma is essential. I mean, this is false without weak König's lemma. The idea is that if there's a step for adding a number to the domain or to the range. I won't mention that. The interesting issue is for adding a set. So let's say you want to add a new set to the domain of the partial isomorphism. That's a new set in Y, and you want to find a let's call it R star. You want to find a corresponding set in S, and the inductive assumption in W, the inductive assumption tells you that there are like arbitrarily large finite approximations to what you want. So there's a binary tree of approximations to the set you're looking for, and weak König's lemma tells you if you have arbitrarily good finite approximations, you have a path through that tree. That's your set S star. So that's how you get your object to add to the range, and that's where weak König's lemma appears. So yeah, that's about as much as I would like to say about this proof. I hope this gives at least some sort of rough idea of what things are involved. So now, how do we get the corollaries? For instance, how do we get collapse of the analytic hierarchy? So if you look at your favorite model theory textbook, say Tenten-Ziegler or Marker, whatever people use, there is a model theoretic criterion for quantifier elimination. Something like this, right? You have a structure A and a structure B, and they have some sort of, they satisfy the theory T for which we want to prove quantifier elimination. Their intersection, it's some sort of common substructure D that might not satisfy T at all. There might be some tuple of elements of this common part, and there is some witness to a purely existential statement in A. So A is related to this tuple in the common part by some quantifier-free formula eta. So to get quantifier elimination, you must know that in such a setup, you will always find an element in the other structure related by the same quantifier-free property to the elements of this common part as well. So that's what quantifier elimination is, model theoretically. So yeah, you get it here with some minor changes, but they can be dealt with. So what does the isomorphism theorem tell you? Well, it tells you that if you've got two models of weak König's lemma, let's say that they share the first order part, which is not quite exactly the same as sharing a common substructure, but it's close enough for say provability purposes. There is some element of the second of this common part of the common part of the second order structures, and in this common part there already lies this set relative to which induction fails. So this is a set that tells you RC0 doesn't hold. Then if you've got what in this context corresponds to a quantifier free property, meaning an arithmetical property, first order quantifiers don't count, second order quantifiers do, that's the ones we want to eliminate. And there is some arithmetical relation between a set in the common part of these structures and a set in say in script Y. well, Y and the second order, this other second order universe W are isomorphic, and the isomorphism can in fact preserve these points A and D. So there's going to be an S here that has the same relation to D that R did in script Y. So that's basically just by general model theoretic reasoning. You get from the isomorphism theory, you get a collapse of the second order quantifier hierarchy. You can actually massage it a little bit to get a more refined, more informative version that tells you what the quantifier theory or what the arithmetical translations of second order formulas are. But bottom line is that you get the following results. So for every formula whatsoever, using how many second order quantifiers you might want, weak Königs lemma star will tell you that given any set relative to which sigma 1 induction fails, your formula C will be equivalent to an arithmetical formula with the set relative to which induction fails as an extra parameter. So this collapse is not just to delta 1, 1. In fact, it's to the arithmetical hierarchy with a single set parameter. So again, if you look at your model theory textbook, there is this notion of model companion of a theory. A model companion of a theory is a theory that has the proper, a model companion of T is a theory, say T star, such that you can always extend the model of T to a model of T star, vice versa. And T star has this property called model completeness, which is a bit weaker than quantifier elimination. And if you apply that to this picture, that's exactly what you get here. So any model of RC 0 star that doesn't satisfy sigma 1 induction extends to a model of weak Königs lemma as well. You can go back. I mean, any model of this is already a model of this theory. And this theory adds no new, and this theory eliminates second order quantifiers. So in this setting where arithmetical quantifiers are ignored, this theory actually has quantifier elimination. So it is the model companion of RC 0 star plus not RC 0. And general things about model companions tell you the following two things. Firstly, any model of weak Königs lemma that doesn't satisfy sigma 1 induction relative to some set is going to be sigma 1 1 closed. You can't add any new true sigma 1 1 statements by extending the second order universe. That's as much as you get. So this corresponds to this fact that models of the model companion of the theory are existentially closed. You cannot add any new existential truths by extending the model. And secondly, the model companion is the strongest AE axiomatized theory that has the same universal theory as your theory you started with. This corresponds to weak Königs lemma plus negated sigma 1 induction being the strongest pi1 2 axiomatized theory that's arithmetically and even pi1 1 conservative over our base theory here. So this provides a sort of answer to Tausner's problem. So Tausner asked whether, well, he asked something slightly different, but the answers are more or less the same. He asked whether the set of pi1 2 statements that are pi1 1 conservative over RC 0 star, whether that's, say, computably axiomatized or is it pi2 in terms of, say, computability theoretic complexity. The answer is that if you explicitly stick negation of induction, negation of the stronger base theory into your axioms, then the set of pi1 2 statements that are pi1 1 conservative is actually axiomatized by weak Königs lemma. So it's computably axiomatized, it's C, and the answer to Tausner's question becomes negative. The answer to more or less his original question is actually positive. So if you don't stick this negation of induction there, then you can answer his question in the positive, but that's a sort of boring proof. It somehow reduces to the old case by a trick or two. So I won't get into that. Okay, so last thing I wanted to discuss is how this relates to Ramsey's theorem. So there's a major problem in reverse mathematics. It's been open for more than a quarter of a century now, that asks, what are the arithmetical consequences of Ramsey's theorem for pairs? Not for triples, those are known. That's AC0, you know what the arithmetical consequences are. Not for quadruples, that's also known, and so on, but for pairs. Ramsey for pairs is an anomalous statement in reverse mathematics. It's incomparable to weak König's lemma, for example, and well, there's lots of stuff to understand about it. There's actually a whole family of Ramsey theoretic statements, somewhere roughly at the strength of Ramsey's theorem for pairs, and yeah, often, in many cases, their number theoretic strength is not really well understood either. So the problem is, what are the pi1,1 consequences of Ramsey's theorem for pairs? It's known that among these pi1,1 consequences, this is pretty easy to prove, is the following thing. I delta 2 is delta 2 induction. So the statement that tells you relative to every set, that's the pi1,1 quantifier, delta 2 induction holds. That's part of these. That's part of these pi1,1 consequences. It's plausible that that's all. It's plausible that that's what the consequences of Ramsey's theorem are axiomatized by. It's also known, due to, say, an important paper by Cholak, Jokusz, and Sleiman at the turn of the century, it's also known that to understand what these pi1,1 consequences are, the only case that you have to care about is understanding what Ramsey's theorem does in models that don't satisfy sigma-2 induction. So the only case that you have to understand is models of RC0. We're back over RC0. The star is gone. Do notice that. That have delta 2 induction but don't have sigma-2 induction. And the interesting thing in this context is that if you take such a model, so you've got a model of RC0 that has a reasonable amount of induction, delta 2, but doesn't have sigma-2, and now you look at its universe of delta 2 definable sets. Now, a delta 2 definable set might not be a set. If this is your model, this is, say, the set theoretic universe. So M is just some first order structure. X is the second order universe. So this is the universe of sets. You only have delta 1 comprehension. So something that's delta 2 definable might not be a set. That's a larger second order universe. And the point is that if you take that larger second order universe, it also satisfies a somewhat reasonable theory. Namely, the theory is our weaker base theory. You need the delta 2 induction to get this, and not sigma-1 induction, because what was failure of sigma-2 induction in the old universe becomes failure of sigma-1 induction relative to something that's just become a set in the larger set theoretic universe. And now we have these surprising results about what happens in such structures if they also satisfy weak König's lemma. So you wonder, is there a way to tell when the delta 2 definables of such a model satisfy weak König's lemma? Is there a simple way to tell when they do? And in fact, there is. I mentioned this principle, this cohesive principle, which says whatever it says. There's no need to remember that. So there is this sort of Ramsey theoretic statement that turns out to have exactly what you care about. So every model of RC0 that also satisfies delta 2 induction you can extend the second order universe to preserve delta 2 induction, but also satisfy this cohesive principle. And secondly, the cohesive principle tells you exactly that the delta 2 definables satisfy weak König's lemma. So the cohesive principle is weak König's lemma on the level of the delta 2 definables. Any delta 2 tree has a delta 2 path. So as a corollary of the isomorphism theorem, for weak König's lemma over this weak-based theory where you don't have sigma 1 induction, you get the following. If you take a model a countable model of RC0 plus delta 2 induction, not sigma 2 induction, and you extend it in two different ways to you extend the set theoretic parts of the model, the numbers don't change, to structures that also satisfy the cohesive principle, then the delta 2 definables of these two structures will be the same. They will be isomorphic. So in a picture, that's what it looks like. You have your original universe with some original ground set theoretic universe. This has to satisfy some induction and fail a somewhat larger amount of induction. You extend this in two different ways to satisfy the cohesive principle, to satisfy co. These two structures, they might not be isomorphic, they might not be elementarily equivalent, they might disagree on some sentences, but their delta 2 definables will agree. So this provides a lot of information on what you can do in order to satisfy new pi1-2 things, for example, to satisfy Ramsey's theorem. So yeah, this slide is sort of technical, and I don't think, well, I can give it a try. So when we were in the setup that I was discussing previously, so we had delta 1 comprehension, delta 1 induction, but not sigma 1 induction. And you wanted to satisfy new existential facts about sets, new sigma 1 sets. The only thing you could do is just to add new sets to get weak König's lemma, and that's it. That's sigma 1 closed. So here, if you're in a model of delta 2 induction but not sigma 2 induction, you can always extend your set theoretic universe so as to get the cohesive principle. And then you can do a little bit more. So there are going to be some sets living in these delta 2 definables. For example, there's a set here, perhaps, which are low in the sense that they're Turing jumps, so complete sigma 1 sets relative to them, they're also delta 2 definable. So you're allowed to add those guys. You're allowed to add those guys to the set theoretic universe. You're allowed to say these guys are sets as well. They're sort of safe to add. And you can't do anything more. This is all that you can do to satisfy sigma 1 sentences in models. If you start with a model of delta 2 but not sigma 2 induction. So in the end, if you're given a pi1-2 statement and you want to know whether it's conservative over RC0 plus delta, pi1-1 conservative over RC0 plus delta 2 induction, plus this additional axiom that you can safely add in this context when you care about Ramsey's theorem, not sigma 2 induction, well, that's going to be the case. This is going to be conservative if and only if your base theory, which is RC0 plus delta 2 induction at the moment, proves some complicated statement. Never mind what it says exactly, but the point is that roughly you can satisfy your statement for all x exists y if you extend your model in whatever way you want to a model of the cohesive principle, and then you add these almost sets to the set theoretic universe so that they become sets. That's all. This statement has a certain well-defined quantifier complexity. So in the end, what this comes out to is the following. We obtain a sort of reduction of the problem, whether the pi1-1 consequences of RC0 plus Ramsey are exactly delta 2 induction. We obtain a reduction of this to the pi1-1 statements with pi5 arithmetical parts. And there's a lot known about pi1-1 statements with somewhat simpler parts. For example, it was a breakthrough result of Patei and Yokoyama a few years back that told us that if you consider pi1-1 sentences with pi3 arithmetical parts, then Ramsey's theorem doesn't add anything beyond what delta 2 induction already knew. And there is some work, some non-trivial information about the pi4, about the pi1-1 consequences of Ramsey with pi4 arithmetical parts. So it turns out that the pi5 case is the crucial case. You don't have to look beyond that. as a sort of warning in this context, which would suggest that maybe there's something different going on when you move from, say, pi 3 to pi 4, or from pi 4 to pi 5, or whatever. There is this result that we proved with Keita and with Kasia Kowalik, who is here, who is my graduate student, that if you look at Ramsey's theorem over the weaker base theory over RC0 star, then that's conservative over RC0 star if you look at pi 1 statements with pi 3 arithmetical parts, but not when you go up to pi 4. So yeah, there's some sort of border here. Yeah, that's pretty much all that I wanted to say. I guess I would want to leave you with a few open problems that I'll briefly discuss. So firstly, this result that weak König's lemma causes elimination of second order quantifiers once you stick the negation of the right kind of axiom into the base theory. This really surprised us. We're not aware of anything similar. So that makes me wonder whether it's in sort of isolated curiosity or whether there are analogs in other settings. For example, might it be the case that some weak enough, well, some version of Kripke-Platek or some other weak theory, plus negation of some stronger set existence axiom, eliminates class quantifiers of some sort once you add them to the language? I don't know. I do wonder about these things. The underlying major question in reverse mathematics remains what the pi 1 consequences of Ramsey's are. We got a reduction of this, but that's still unsolved. And finally, the last question I wanted to mention is what Tausner originally asked about is he wanted to know about the complexity of the conservativity problem over not RC0 star, but RC0 plus I sigma 2. I delta 2, sorry, delta 2 induction. So we proved that if you just have delta 2 induction in the base theory, then the set of statements that are pi 1 conservative over that is that's pi 2, so that's not computably axiomatizable. And if you add the negation of sigma 2 induction, that becomes computably axiomatizable. That's just applying our weak König lemma isomorphism theorem, raising it up one level in the arithmetical hierarchy. Going up one level seems to lose finite axiomatizability. So we do wonder whether there's like a maximal strongest set existence statement that gives no new information about numbers over this base theory, over this framework. Okay, I guess I should stop here. So thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable question. I think it's largely a historical / sociological question, because it's clearly true that at some point, well, this is, I mean, still studied, right? But people were and are interested of equivalence of various set theoretic axioms in a much stronger logical setting, right? Over a much stronger base theory. And why it's not called reverse mathematics. My original background is like at the opposite end. It's in bounded arithmetic. So for me, these theories are already strong. And there, Stephen Cook came up with this idea of calling some results of this nature boundary reverse mathematics. But I think it didn't stick. So somehow at this stage, the name seems to be pretty well attached to this particular level of logical strength. But there's no deep reason for that, I guess. That's all that I can say. Yeah, so if you want, yeah, right. So if you, the question is whether, yeah, that's insanely strong. Pi 1-2 comprehension. So reverse mathematics at the Pi 1-2 level, right? So Pi 1-2 comprehension as such is a Pi 1-4 axiom. So not that if you want to get equivalences, not that many things are going to, natural mathematical statements are going to be Pi 1-4. So there are some results by, is it Simpson and Mummert? I'm not quite sure. There are some results about some statements from general topology that are exactly Pi 1-2 comprehension. There is, if you're okay with just, well, being barely provable or barely unprovable at this level, determinacy for games where the winning conditions are Boolean combinations of sigma 2, sigma 0, 2. Each of these is provable in the in Pi 1-2 comprehension, and in fact, if you take all Boolean combinations, that axiomatizes the Pi 1-3 consequences of Pi 1-2 comprehension. So if you take the statement every Boolean combination is determined, that's no longer provable. That becomes Pi 1-3 reflection for Pi 1-2 comprehension. And once, the reason I know this is that together with Henryk Michalewski, who was doing his move from descriptive set theory towards machine learning with a stop in reverse mathematics or in automata theory for a while, we had this one paper at a computer science conference where we proved that Rabin's theorem on the decidability of the monadic second order theory of the binary tree, that's just barely unprovable in Pi 1-2 comprehension for reasons related to determinacy fundamentally. Like, determinacy is what you need to prove the decidability. So there is some work, but you know, Pi 1-2 comprehension is really hard to understand proof theoretically and computability theoretically. So it's hard to get a non-trivial result that will somehow be deep and mathematically informative. That's somewhere just, yeah. Yeah, but Kruskal's theorem is lower, right? So Kruskal's theorem is within Pi 1-1 comprehension. Yeah, yeah, so there are reasonable forms of Kruskal's tree theorem, like uniform versions that are known to be equivalent to Pi 1-1 comprehension. But Pi 1-1 comprehension is Pi 1-3. That's more reasonable from, you know, point of view of stating mathematical statements than Pi 1-4 is. Yeah, there are a number of combinatorial equivalents of Pi 1-1 comprehension. So for example, let me come back to determinacy. That's kind of something that I know, but I'm assuming you know this as well. So, so for Pi 1-1 comprehension, it's determinacy for games where the winning condition is a Boolean combination of open sets. Are there very combinatorial statements? Well, there is stuff going on about the reverse mathematical strength of, say, Freises conjecture, also known as Lever's theorem, but I think that's not settled yet. And it's already stronger. The theory is already stronger than what I'm really comfortable with, so I don't. Oh yeah, graph minor. I don't remember the exact reverse math. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty. I think the bounds are pretty tight. I'm not sure it's known exactly. Is it beyond Pi 1-1 comprehension? I don't want to make a fool of myself, but it's somewhere there, right? It's pretty high up. But Pi 1-2 is really strong. Yeah, insanely, as you said.
noticed that basically 90%. But then and maybe you can notice that you don't really need all of.
Yeah, I don't know if you can easily tell who was the first to notice. I mean, you must reverse mathematics as the study of fragments of second-order arithmetic, along, I guess, with the name reverse mathematics, was born at Harvey Friedman's ICM talk in the early 70s. But at the time, I don't think the name was strictly fixed, but people must have been well aware at the time already. And I'm sure the Polish group, the Mostowski group, they must have been well aware that much of mathematics happens at the level of second-order arithmetic. They must have known this. The statement that 99% of mathematics, by which 99% can be done in arithmetical comprehension and 85% can be done with König's lemma, that's something that was stated by Steve Simpson. And that might be his estimate. And I make no claims about its veracity either way, but so they must have counted somewhere back in the 80s, and it came out to be like 99 of 100 are arithmetical comprehension, and somewhere around 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 are weak König's lemma. Thanks.